everyone, and welcome back into another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Wednesday to you all. We have officially made it to Hump Day this week. We still have a lot to talk about, including the start of the week 6 of the NFL season in a day's time. Thursday Night Football between my Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers, the first divisional game of the year for the Seattle Seahawks. A very big one for both teams, one that admittedly I'm dreading a little bit as a Seattle fan. I'm going to have you covered, though, in all things general betting and also prop betting as well. For that, we continue as well with our positional rankings, continuing with our wide receivers and tight ends as always, and then I conclude today's show by giving you my weekly shout-out report, the key wide receiver cornerback matchups that will define fantasy football for this week. It should be a good one, but before we begin with any of it, I do want to ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network. It is greatly appreciated if you do feel so inclined by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters who are doing their own great things in their own right. Go check them out as well as soon as you subscribe. But another way to interact with this show specifically and directly throughout its duration is to consider leaving a super chat, super thanks, or super stickers feature here on YouTube to contribute and interact with the show. I definitely want to hear your guys' opinion. It's not just all about me talking about whatever topics I want to talk about. I want to include as many different diverse topics that you feel should be spoken about on this show. I'm open to all questions, comments, and concerns, and it just makes this show that much better, and it continues to grow the network as a whole as well. So if you feel so inclined, consider leaving that, and I will be eternally grateful, and the show and network will be as well. Without further ado, let us jump right into our first segment of today, starting off with tomorrow night's game. Thursday Night Football, Seahawks, 49ers, a lot of stakes on the line. The Seahawks coming into this one 3-2, kind of disappointing to be at 3-2 at this stage in the season, because this feels like the point where Seattle will have a huge drop-off because their schedule was perhaps one of the lighter ones in the schedule in the NFL up to this point, only playing one team that purportedly will be in the NFC playoff picture in Detroit, and we saw what happened there. I'm not making any excuses about the defense, even though I want to, but that's what it was. That's the kind of situation Seattle is in. And then this past weekend, losing to the New York Giants of all teams in embarrassing fashion almost, because of the fact that even though, they had now 2 weeks where they knew they were going to be down a lot of their star defensive players, they didn't look like they changed anything. And that's a problem. That's always been a problem. As a Seattle fan since the early 2010s, nothing necessarily changes from the Legion of Boom era to now, where you can see the Seattle defense improving. In the first 3 games, I don't necessarily want to say it was mirage because I still have hope, but it certainly speaks to the fact that they're now 3-2, and they were 3-0 after facing Bo Nix, Skylar Thompson, and Jacoby Brissett. And after facing one, not necessarily the most competent quarterback, but at least someone who we know can stick to a game plan, in Jared Goff, and then Daniel Jones is the other one, kind of falling apart defensively. And now they head into this Thursday night game on the road against San Fran. And this is what, Mike McDonald signed up for, right? I feel like the reason why Seattle hired Mike McDonald is not necessarily to, completely focus on revamping the defense, but focus on beating or catching up to the NFC West, the rest of the NFC West, and specifically the McVay-Shanahan style offenses that they know they'll be facing. And so this game is the litmus test. Even though both teams are banged up, let's look at the 49ers. They have a lot of pieces missing, most chief among them the McCaffrey injury, and they have a kicker down now, which is a very integral part of what they do if they kind of stall in the red zone, which has been happening more so often for them than any other season in the Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan era, where they haven't finished drives, then that becomes a problem as well. And so this game certainly feels like it'll be close, but I think the betting odds and myself specifically, as a Seattle fan, think otherwise. Looking at the betting odds, the over-under is 47.5. I believe the line right now is San Fran as 5.5-point favorites. Seattle is at plus 135, and San Fran is at minus 185 to win this game. And the way I see it, I feel like Seattle certainly seems like it has an infrastructure that it feels it can follow to get wins. But it's mainly on the offensive side of the ball. When you see the offensive side of the ball for Seattle, you see an offense that plays mistake-free football that, kind of keeps Geno Smith upright behind that very makeshift offensive line, and most importantly, feels like it can score on multiple drives and keep opposing defenses on their toes and keep them honest. Whereas on the defensive side of the football, I don't know whether it's kind of this weird alteration from the Pete Carroll mindset to the Mike Macdonald mindset, where there's a more serious approach to how Mike Macdonald approaches defensive scheming. But it certainly feels like there's a disconnect, because I feel like when you're a team like Seattle, you need that secondary depth to really help you, that tertiary depth to really sustain you going forward. And it feels like Mike Macdonald is kind of lost without the players that he has at his disposal that are quote-unquote his superstar players. His Leonard Williams, his Byron Murphys, his Boye Mafes. And now it's almost as if the Seattle Seahawks are playing a bend-don't-break game, but mostly breaking because either A, the players that are on the field are not confident in their own abilities, and that might be a coaching thing, or B, they're just plain out bad. And I think it's a mixture of the both. The fact that there is still some players that we've retained who just aren't worthy of the Seattle Seahawks defensive ways and just don't belong on the field. And then when you bring in a kind of tough luck guy in Mike Macdonald after, happy-go-lucky Pete Carroll, there is a clear cultural change there. You can't ignore the fact that Mike Macdonald is more like, we have to clean the slate and we can't let distractions in, whereas Pete Carroll was all about keeping this youthful energy, so to speak. And so, headed into this game, the challenge for Seattle is to kind of accept that they're not going to win this game defensively like people thought, but feel like they have a unique opportunity on the offensive side of the ball to make this a shootout. On the San Fran side of things, I feel like it's just about sustaining drives. And you can definitely control the ball against the Seattle defense. The Giants had a great example of that. Really balanced offensive performance from them last week in Seattle in that huge upset. But the thing about San Fran is that this year, I feel like they're kind of playing it much more safe than we expected. And it's to be expected as well, because we can't ignore the injuries. But these players they have on their roster still are fantastic players. You just have to, account for them differently. Because Jordan Mason's is still a very solid physical back who I really like. And fantasy managers also like him as well. And then you have a guy like Jawan Jennings, who has actually been on this team for quite some time, has the experience, loves being like that solid route runner in that system. And then you have Brandon Ayuk still and George Kittle as well. So you don't have scrubs at these positions. These are guys who have been in this system, understand this system. But I feel like there's a sense of timidity there. Maybe it's a little bit of that Super Bowl hangover where they were so close to winning that game in overtime and they just let it all slip. And they lost in the last play, and right now they can't get that out of their heads. And they're kind of stuck in that mindset of, we were so close, but yet no cigar. And so I kind of feel like had, McCaffrey been there to start the year, they definitely would have felt calmer. But with, this leading into the offseason as well, into this year, kind of muddied the waters in San Fran a little bit, which is why they're here. And that, kind of comeback upset that they had against Arizona, where they were up 13, I believe late in the third, and then Arizona comes storming back, just doesn't happen to a team like San Francisco, even with all those injuries. So this game, as Untamed Music enters the chat, welcome to you, my friend. And he's asking about a trade. What side wins this trade in half PPR? Gibbs, Darnold, Dell, and Quentin Johnston for Marvin Harrison Jr., Najee Harris, Baker Mayfield, and Andrews. Well, I think the side that wins it is the one with Gibbs, Darnold, Dell, and Johnston. And the reason why is that, yes, in PPR, it's not just about touches, it's about receptions and what you do with those receptions. But I feel like the Gibbs, Darnold, Dell, Johnston side of things represents a group of players that kind of seem tertiary in nature. That they're not big superstars, but they're so vital to their team's offenses that you can't ignore their output. Let's look at Gibbs, for example. This year, you can't say he's been the best Lions running back, because David Montgomery has looked really impressive. But he sustains what the Lions can do in the run game with what he does. And he's not just a solid runner, he's a solid receiver as well. Sam Darnold, he's a QB, and you have to view him differently in this sense, but he is perhaps the most vital quarterback of the NFL season so far for what the Vikings are doing with him. And then Dell and Johnston, two receivers who don't get a lot of attention in their respective teams. Maybe Tank Dell gets at least a little bit more attention because of that receiver room. But both of them have proven that with the touches they get, they can make magic happen. Especially a guy like Quentin Johnston, who this time last year, a lot of people were skeptical of in terms of how he would fit into the Chargers offense. And not for nothing, yes, they're a running team, but Johnston already has more receiving touchdowns than he had last year. So that's something worth noting. Whereas the Marvin, Najee, Baker, Andrews trade side of things is a little bit more unusual in nature. So I feel like that group isn't necessarily bad. I just feel like either one or two of them kind of drags down what that trade could be. So I would pick the Gibbs, Darnold, and Dell side. Hopefully that's your side of the offer. Good luck to you and your fantasy football exploits, my friends, and welcome to the show. But quickly before we end this first segment here, my prediction is that San Fran will cover. I feel like Seattle's too banged up defensively to really account for the still solid weapons that the San Fran offense has on the offensive side of the ball. So that's my prediction. Let me know what you think in the comments. That will just about do it for this first segment, though. Coming up next, we're going to transition to the prop bet side of things. What are some popular ones that I think will hit for tomorrow night's game? We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.